The frosting was still soft, a swirl of perfect pink peaks, a testament to hours of meticulous effort. I remember thinking with a sudden sharp clarity that felt almost alien, how utterly ridiculous it was that I was crying over a cake. My 30th birthday. 30 years. A milestone I'd been quietly anticipating, looking forward to a gentle celebration with loved ones. And there I was, hot tears blurring the scene, the sweet, comforting scent of vanilla and sugar suddenly thick and suffocating, clinging to the back of my throat. He'd turned, Mark, my brother-in-law, a smear of something dark and viscous clinging to the corner of his lip, a smirk plastered on his face that was more cruel than funny, more deeply unsettling than anything I'd ever witnessed. Then the words tossed out like casual insults, designed to sting, to humiliate, to chip away at the fragile edifice of my 30th birthday joy. My stomach dropped, a sickening lurch that felt like falling into an icy abyss, a sensation so profound it stole my breath. That's when it hit me, the wave of pure, unadulterated panic, a primal scream trapped within my chest. He'd seen my face, my immediate, visceral reaction, the flicker of hurt and disbelief that must have been so starkly visible. And for a split second, just a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, the smirk faltered. He saw me see him, saw the raw vulnerability he had so deliberately provoked, and the tables in that terrifying instant felt like they'd irrevocably, perhaps permanently, turned. It had been a stupid argument, or rather, a stupid one-sided tirade that had been brewing for a while, a storm of Mark's making. He'd always been like this, my brother-in-law Mark. The entitled kind of arrogance that masqueraded as confidence, the unshakable belief that he was the funniest, smartest, most important person in any room he occupied. And my husband, bless his oblivious, peace-loving heart, had always tried to keep the peace, to smooth over Mark's rough edges, to deflect his barbed comments with a well-timed joke or a change of subject. I tried that too for years. Tried to overlook the condescending remarks, the thinly veiled insults disguised as jokes, the way he always managed to steal the spotlight, making sure everyone knew how much better he was than everyone else in the vicinity. I chalked it up to his own insecurities, to his desperate need for validation, a gaping void he constantly sought to fill by diminishing those around him. But on my 30th birthday, with a cake I'd spent hours on, a cake meant to be a centerpiece for a family gathering, a symbol of celebration and self-appreciation, something shifted irrevocably. The party had been going well, or so I thought, in that blissful state of mild ignorance that precedes a rude awakening. My parents were there, their familiar, comforting presence a balm to my soul. My sister, my confidant, her easy laughter echoing through the room. A few close friends, their faces alight with warmth and affection. Then Mark had arrived, late, naturally, with a half-empty bottle of cheap wine clutched in his hand and a story about a traffic jam that sounded suspiciously fabricated, the kind of flimsy excuse he'd perfected over the years. He'd spent the first hour making pointed comments about my career choices, subtly implying I'd settled, that I wasn't living up to my potential, that I was somehow falling short of some invisible benchmark he'd arbitrarily set. My husband, bless him again, had tried to steer the conversation, to redirect Mark's relentless focus, but Mark was like a terrier with a bone, unwilling to relinquish his chosen target. Then came the cake. I'd brought it out, the candles flickering like tiny beacons of hope, everyone joining in the familiar, heartfelt strains of Happy Birthday. It was a simple red velvet, my absolute favorite, with a creamy, tangy cream cheese frosting that I'd meticulously piped into delicate rosettes, each one a tiny victory. It was a labor of love, a small act of self-celebration, a quiet acknowledgement of my own journey. As I was about to lean forward to extinguish the candles and make a silent wish, Mark leaned over, his voice loud enough to cut through the singing like a shard of glass. "You know what this cake needs?" He'd slurred, a glint of something mischievous, something entirely unwelcome in his eye. Before anyone could react, before I could even process the question, before a word of protest could escape my lips, he leaned forward and I felt it. A wet, foul sensation against the pristine frosting, right in the very center, where the candles stood so brightly. He pulled back, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer, a perverse satisfaction radiating from him. "A little something extra," he'd added, his gaze locking onto mine, a challenge in his eyes. The silence that followed was immediate, absolute and deafening. The singing stopped mid-note, the final joyous crescent, abruptly cut off, leaving an awkward, ringing void. My parents' faces paled, their usual jovial expressions replaced by shock and a dawning horror. My husband looked horrified, his face a mask of disbelief, then his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a fury I rarely saw. But it was Mark's reaction, the split second where his smugness wavered, where a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face as he saw the absolute shock and disgust register on mine, that truly made my blood run cold. He'd seen me, truly seen me, not as a plaything for his cruel amusement, but as a person whose feelings he had deliberately and callously trampled. He realized in that instant that he might have gone too far. The panic I felt wasn't just about the desecrated cake, the ruined centerpiece of my birthday celebration. It was the dawning realization of his malicious intent, a conscious act of cruelty, and the terrifying possibility that he might actually relish my distress, that he might derive some perverse pleasure from my pain. In that frozen moment, the air crackled with an almost tangible tension. My husband was already stepping towards Mark, his fists clenched at his sides, a low growl rumbling in his chest. My mother let out a small strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. My father, a man not given to overt displays of emotion, looked like he might explode, his face flushing a dangerous red. But I just stood there rooted to the spot, a knot of dread tightening in my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. Mark, for all his bluster and bravado, was a coward. He thrived on power imbalances, on making others feel small so he could feel big, so he could inflate his own fragile ego. And he'd clearly expected a scene, a tearful breakdown, a dramatic confrontation. He wanted me to be the shrieking victim, the one who dissolved into inconsolable sobs, validating his perceived superiority. He wanted to be the one who could then offer hollow platitudes of comfort, all the while basking in the attention he'd manufactured. But something shifted within me. Something deep inside snapped. The fear didn't disappear, not entirely, but it transmuted. It became a cold, hard resolve, a steely determination that settled in my core. I looked at him, at his smirking face, at the trace of spittle still visible on the pink frosting, a glistening, repulsive testament to his act. And I knew with an absolute, unwavering certainty that he would not get the reaction he craved. He would not make me cry, not here, not now, not over this. He would not have the satisfaction of witnessing my humiliation. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind that starts from the very soles of your feet and travels all the way up to your aching lungs. My voice, when it finally emerged, was unervingly calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. "Mark," I said, the single word cutting through the charged silence. "That's incredibly unhygienic. And frankly pretty disgusting." I turned away from him, ignoring the widening eyes around the table, the whispers starting to ripple through the stunned guests. I walked to the kitchen sink, the familiar ceramic cool beneath my fingertips. I washed my hands thoroughly, the soap and water a small act of purification, and then with deliberate slowness, I picked up a clean cake knife. I approached the cake once more, its once pristine surface now marred by his petty act. I cut a perfect slice from the very edge of the cake, far from the desecrated center, ensuring each slice was untouched, untainted. I placed it on a clean plate and offered it to my mother. "Mom," I said, my voice still level, devoid of any tremor, "would you like a slice? It's red velvet." My mother looked at me, her eyes searching mine for a hint of the distress she surely expected to see. Then she looked at the cake, at the offending smear, then back at Mark, her expression a complex mixture of bewilderment and dawning comprehension. Hesitantly she took the plate, a small smile finally touching her lips. I then turned to my father, then my sister, then my friends, offering each of them a slice from the untouched perimeter. The atmosphere shifted, subtly but undeniably. The shock was still there, a lingering residue, but it was being replaced by a quiet, collective understanding. They saw Mark's blatant disrespect, his childish cruelty, and they saw my measured, dignified response. They saw the real Mark, exposed not by shouting or accusations, but by my refusal to play his game, to be the victim he so desperately wanted me to be. They saw him for what he was. Mark stood frozen, his smirk gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, a vacant stare that betrayed his utter confusion. He had anticipated tears, a dramatic outburst, a spectacle to feed his narcissistic hunger. He had not anticipated this cool, calm dissection of his actions, this quiet reclaiming of my celebration. He'd expected me to crumble, not to calm. Why offer everyone else cake as if nothing had happened? He opened his mouth to speak, to salvage some semblance of his planned narrative, but no words came out. The carefully constructed scenario, the one where he was the witty provocateur and I was the pathetic victim, had evaporated into thin air, leaving him exposed and diminished. The rest of the evening was undeniably stilted. Mark, stripped of his power to provoke, to command the emotional landscape of the room, became sullen and withdrawn. He downed his cheap wine with rapid gulps, the effervescence long since faded, and found an excuse to leave early, muttering something about feeling unwell, a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of control. My husband, however, gave him a look that spoke volumes, a silent promise of a reckoning later, a clear indication that Mark's behavior would not be forgotten. But for me, the real reckoning had already happened in that moment of quiet defiance. The next few days were surprisingly quiet, a stark contrast to the potential fallout I had braced myself for. No one mentioned the cake incident directly to Mark, no one engaged him in the arena he had chosen. But the air around him had changed, a subtle but palpable shift in the social dynamics. My parents, usually so eager to shield him, to smooth over his rough edges, were noticeably cooler in their interactions, their conversations with him shorter, more formal, devoid of their usual warmth. My sister, who had always been Mark's biggest defender, his unwavering ally, started to distance herself, her texts becoming less frequent, her calls less enthusiastic. And my friends, who had witnessed his behavior firsthand, treated him with a polite but palpable reserve, a polite distance that spoke volumes. The whispers, when they did circulate, were no longer about my reaction, about any potential tears or outbursts, but about his behavior, his shocking lack of taste and consideration. The stories started to circulate, not as idle gossip, but as observations, as factual accounts of his appalling conduct. "Can you believe what Mark did?" became the hushed refrain, tinged with a mixture of shock and disdain, a collective judgment being passed. He tried, of course, to mitigate the damage, to reassert his perceived dominance. He tried to laugh it off, to make light of it in a text to my husband, a transparent attempt to dismiss the gravity of his actions. He even attempted a half-hearted apology through my husband a week later, couched in vague terms about being a bit out of line, a classic Mark maneuver, designed to offer just enough acknowledgement without truly taking responsibility. But the damage was done. The image of him spitting in my birthday cake, then looking utterly flummoxed when I didn't break down, had been etched into the minds of everyone present, an indelible stain on his character. He had shown his true colors, not in a moment of uncontrolled anger, but in a deliberate, calculated act of petty cruelty. And I had responded not with fury, not with tears, but with quiet dignity, which in its own way was far more devastating, far more effective in exposing him. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a profound sense of quiet resolution, a feeling of inner peace that settled over me. He hadn't been punished, not in any tangible external way. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic ultimatums issued, no drawn-out confrontations. But he had been seen, truly seen, for the insecure, spiteful individual he was. He had been exposed, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his own actions. And the social tapestry, the intricate web of relationships, had adjusted accordingly. He was no longer the life of the party, the charming rogue who could get away with anything. He was the man who spat in his sister-in-law's birthday cake, a small dark stain on an otherwise joyous occasion, a mark of his inherent unpleasantness. And that, I found, was consequence enough. The quiet judgment of those who mattered, the subtle shift in how he was perceived, was a far more potent punishment than any outburst could have been.